Page.
I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Lincoln Lancaster County Planning Commission of September 18th, 2024. A printed agenda is available outside the hearing room, and a copy of the full agenda, including the staff reports, are available online or at the Planning Department, room 213. The Open Meetings Act is posted just inside the doors of the back of the room. Out of courtesy of those attending this meeting, commissioners and the staff, cell phones may not be used in the chamber during any portion of this meeting. We appreciate your cooperation. Please note the Planning Commission action today is final on the following items. 1.3, pre-existing special permit 28F, and 1.4, special permit 19006B. Any aggrieved person may appeal final action of the Planning Commission to the City Council or the County Board by filing a notice of appeal with the clerk within 14 days following the action of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission action on all other items is a recommendation to the City Council or County Board. The first item of business is approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held September 4th, 2024.
So moved, Campbell.
Second, Edens.
Ball,
Yes.
Campbell,
Yes.
Cruz,
Abstain.
Ebert,
Yes.
Edens,
Yes.
Rodenberg,
Yes.
Joy.
Yes.
Minutes approved.
We will now proceed with today's agenda. The next item of business is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda will be called at the same time and will not be scheduled for a separate public hearing unless there is a request from someone wishing to speak or at the request of a commission member. I will ask Shelley to read all the consent agenda items into the record. Once those items are read, she will ask if there is anyone wishing to speak. If you wish to speak on an item on the consent agenda, we would ask that you stand and state that item. That item will then be removed from the consent agenda and scheduled as a separate public hearing under Section 3 of today's agenda. All items remaining on the consent agenda will be voted upon in total with a motion for approval. Shelley, will you please call the items on the consent agenda?
Item 1.1, Comprehensive Plan Conformance 24017. To review as to conformance with the 2050 Lincoln Lancaster County Comprehensive Plan, a request to declare city property as a surplus on property generally located north of and adjacent to the east-west alley west of 10th Street between M and N Street. Item 1.2, Street and Alley Vacation 24009, vacating the remaining 142-foot portion of the east-west alley east of North 24th Street, south of Y Street, adjacent to property generally located at 24th and Y Street. Item 1.3, pre-existing special permit 28F, amending existing special permit per the Lincoln Municipal Code Chapter 27.63.075 to modify the approved signage plan and increase the size and area allowed for directional and freestanding signs within the permit boundary on property generally located at 3800 South 48th Street, and this is final action. Item 1.4, Special Permit 19006B, to amend the existing Grandview Estates Second Edition CUP Community Unit Plan by allowing waivers to the minimum lot area and average lot width for single-family dwellings on property generally located at South 76th Street and Ambrose Drive. This also is final action. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on these items?
Yes.
The street and alley vacation for 24009 is within the borders of Clinton Neighborhood Organization, and it was spoke about at the Clinton Neighborhood Organization meeting earlier this month.
Thank you. I also have I am associated with the pre-existing special permit 28F, therefore I will be abstaining from that.
If there is anyone wishing to speak on these consent agenda items, please stand and state that item.
We do not see anyone here that would like to speak on the consent agenda items, so we will now entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
I move that we approve the consent agenda. Campbell?
Sorry. Second, Edens.
Shelley?
Ball,
Yes.
Campbell,
Yes.
Cruz,
Yes.
Ebert,
Yes.
Edens,
Yes.
Rodenberg,
Yes.
Joy.
Abstain.
Consent agenda approved.
We will now proceed to public hearings. Prior to staff making a brief presentation, each staff person should state their name, agency, and address. The applicant will then be requested to present his or her testimony, followed by those who wish to testify in support, followed by those who wish to testify in opposition. The staff will then be given an opportunity to respond to the testimony, and then the applicant shall be given an opportunity for rebuttal. If during your testimony you have copies of documents or materials you would like distributed to the Planning Commission members or include in part of the record, please provide them to the clerk. Each person testifying should state their name and address and shall have 5 minutes to speak unless additional time is requested and granted. The clerk will use the light system to help aid your timing for the testimony. The lights will appear on the monitors provided. The clerk will indicate when you have 1 minute remaining to wrap up your testimony. The red light indicates that your 5 minutes have expired. Once the final minute has lapsed, the clerk will indicate that your time is up. The Planning Commission will vote immediately at the close of the public hearing unless the Commission votes to defer action or continue the public hearing. Shelley, please call the first public hearing item.
Item 5.1A, Comprehensive Plan Amendment 24004 to amend the Lincoln Lancaster County 2050 Comprehensive Plan to change the future land use designation from urban density residential to commercial on property generally located on the northwest corner of South 70th Street and Nebraska Parkway, and associated with item 5.1B, change of zone 24003 from AGR Agricultural Residential District to O3 Office District, also on property generally located on the northwest corner of South 70th Street and Nebraska Parkway, and associated item 5.1C, use permit 24003 to allow a use permit in the O3 Office District zoning district for approximately 51,000 square feet of commercial floor area with waivers to setbacks on property generally located on the northwest corner of South 70th Street and Nebraska Parkway. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on these applications?
No.
Are there any ex parte communications that took place or additional information you learned while visiting any of these sites to be disclosed?
No.
Steve Hendrickson with the Planning Department, 555 South 10th Street. I'll go over all three applications at one time, so the explanation of the facts of the case will be perhaps a little bit more than brief, but I'll try to go through them fairly quickly. So the applications you have are all relating to this triangular-shaped property on the northwest corner of South 70th Street and Nebraska Parkway. Today, the property is zoned AGR. It has a single house on the property, and it slopes fairly steeply from the east side of the site, drops about 40 feet to the northwest corner, or the little tip of the site here. The property today is part of, mostly all of the property around it is zoned AG, Agricultural Residential, AGR. The first application that is before you is a comprehensive plan amendment. This property, as well as the property in all four directions, is listed as urban residential in the comprehensive plan. So one of the requests is to change the comprehensive plan designation from urban residential to commercial, and at the same time to then also change the zoning from the property from AGR to O3. The O3 is a office zoning district, and the proposed use permit, which is the third application, is for 51,000 square feet of office space or commercial space that is allowed in the O3 zoning district. In terms of the use permit itself, it comes with a site plan that goes along with the site. It shows basically two future office buildings. While the site plan shows two buildings, it could be built in any variety of number of buildings. It does show a rather larger setback along Nebraska Parkway. Detention is in the northwest corner of the site, and there would be a new driveway access to Nebraska Parkway, along with the construction of a longer right-hand turn lane. The grading plan shows that in regards to the site that has quite a lot of drop off from the east side of the site to the west side of the site, that they are generally grading the site significantly, removing all of the trees from the site. And along the north part of the property and along the east part of the property is proposed a retaining wall because they are dropping the site as much as 15 to 20 feet in some places. So the retaining wall is 15 feet high approximately along this northern end here and along the northeast end here, as it would be next to 70th Street and also next to the acreage property to the north. In terms of the history of the site, this site, and we'll get the zoning turned off here, this site is provided access to South 69th Street when the South Fork Estate subdivision was approved in 1988. It was approved with 69th Street stubbing into this property so that it could have future access via a cul-de-sac to the South Fork Estate subdivision to the north. South Fork actually today only has the one-way in and out, but it is fairly low density in terms of the number of units that are within it. The Nebraska Parkway itself, the former Highway 2, has a very long history of being treated as an expressway with limited access along it. Really kind of going all the way back for the last 40 plus years, it has been Lincoln's primary expressway, limited access roadway, formerly Highway 2, within the community. So its function is very much different than your typical Old Cheney Road, Yankee Hill Road, O Street, in terms of the amount of access and how it has been treated. Both the city and the Nebraska Department of Transportation have been treating it as an expressway. It is designated as an expressway in the comprehensive plan and our access management policy. And really, if you go back over the entire history of it, there is only two places where there are a driveway on Nebraska Parkway if you go from 14th Street out to 98th Street. One would be the Nebco cement plant at about east of 48th Street. Actually, the Nebco cement plant predates all of this entirely. So it had access there. We have air photos showing the 1940s that the plant was there. I don't know exactly when it started, but it definitely predated all of this. And then the Fort, which is just west of 56th Street, also has a driveway which was approved in the mid-'80s. But since that time, the access management policy of the city, which was adopted some 20 years ago, it has been that as any kind of development, be it residential or commercial, that the access points be streets and those access points be approximately a half mile apart. And anyone today who's traveled up and down along Nebraska Parkway, you'll see that pretty much that is the character of the area, where there is a limited amount of access points to the expressway. Now, and in terms of this particular site, over the years we've received numerous questions about rezoning the site, and we had noted that NDOT had acquired access, so there is no access to Nebraska Parkway today, and that with any redevelopment of the property, while it has a driveway today on 70th Street, because of the bend in 70th Street and its act, that we would be not having any redevelopment take access to 70th Street either. So the access would be solely to 69th Street in terms of this area. When this application first came in, the city, now that it is Nebraska Parkway and no longer Highway 2, the maintenance for the property had been turned over to the city. And the city assumed that that also meant that the access control was also that of the city. But we were then informed by NDOT that no, indeed, NDOT had retained their access rights to the site. So this application that came in, we routed to NDOT to see if they would be changing their mind on this, how this is treated. And they let us know in April that no, indeed, they would not be in favor of access, because the city had always made it very clear we would not be in favor of a street or a driveway access to Nebraska Parkway here, it being an expressway and that being very much contrary to the access management policy and how the street is used today. In May, we were then informed by NDOT that they had reversed their position and decided to grant access. Their comments are in the staff report that mentioned that based it being on an urban context and its relationship to 70th Street, they thought it was appropriate to allow access given certain conditions, which I think the developer is willing to meet in terms of the right-hand turn lane, purchasing the access control from the state. However, that does not change the city's position, which is this particular access point is unwise and is not one that is in keeping with the long character of trying to develop an expressway within the community. An expressway is a very much different type of street, as I mentioned, in terms of the arterial and really the function, why that is designed for 55 miles an hour. I think anyone who has traveled Nebraska Parkway knows that the traffic flow is actually often quite above 55 miles an hour. And particularly in this location, though it meets the site distance standards, when you get to 70th Street, you can't see any of the traffic coming from the east of 70th Street. And so the city is concerned about not only just having the access here, but really changing the character overall, particularly for a driveway. Now that said, this application, while we think it's important to try to maintain that expressway character, as noted, NDOT has the control over the access and has granted, given certain conditions, the access approval. So the applicant applied for a deviation request, and the city, not having any control over the access, had to approve the access on Nebraska Parkway because NDOT did. That does not change the city's position, though, that this is contrary to access management, and this is not a wise idea to have a driveway access, and would be a poor precedent for other developments up and down Nebraska Parkway. Now, in addition to the concerns about the access, then there's also the concerns in terms of the land use of the property as well. We think this site, despite the fact that it has a lot of topography, is still very appropriate and can be easily perhaps is a little overdoing it, but can be developed with urban residential uses. The South Fork Estates Homeowners Association, which is the association to the north, had sent in a letter of approval for this application, and their representative is here today to discuss that further. And we certainly understand why some in the South Fork Estates neighborhood might be concerned about this property, which access would be coming back through their neighborhood. They might be concerned that this neighborhood would develop with a commercial use, for instance, or an apartment use that would put a lot of traffic back through their neighborhood. But as I noted, consistently as we have talked to people about this property, we have said, one, it would not have access to 70th Street or Nebraska Parkway. Two, it would be developed in conformance with a comprehensive plan that would show it as urban residential and in a zoning district that was appropriate with the adjacent AGR zoning. A matter of fact, in this case, what we would view is something that is just across the street. Of course, wouldn't my viewer do that to me? Right across the street is the Artisan Meadows neighborhood. Artisan Meadows is zoned R1 and is right next to Country Meadows, which is zoned AGR. So that's what the type of land use that we'd be looking at on this property, either single family detached or a single family attached property development within the R1 zoning. And maybe this is a good chance to switch over to the other viewer since I'm trying to get this one back booted up properly. But if we can go to the monitor here, this is just one real quick example of there would be multiple ways that you could potentially develop this property, but this is one that's just showing continuation of the property with one or more cul-de-sacs. In this case, we might have a smaller size cul-de-sac such as we have had in other areas of town with some townhomes that are off of the new cul-de-sac. In this particular little sketch, there was 14 townhomes that were shown. And one that actually, quite frankly, would be a little bit easier to work with the topography. You would not have to do as dramatic of grading to the site and as much retaining walls if you were developing the site residentially. And now I can finally get back to my viewer here. And I've had people say, well, in talking about this site, is it realistic to think that somebody would want to live in a house along Nebraska Parkway? And certainly, given the character and the volume of the trips on Nebraska Parkway, that's a very legitimate question. But what we also pointed out in the staff report is, now that I can show Artisan Meadows right across the street, you've had multiple new houses developed along Nebraska Parkway with setbacks of 50 to 60 feet Since 2007, when Artisan Meadows was approved, those houses range in price from $430,000 to $550,000 and have been developed and occupied ever since. Even South Fork Estates has 4 houses that back up to Nebraska Parkway, and there's other residential development along Nebraska Parkway as well. So we view that having this redeveloped with an R1 zoning somewhere in the area of 15 to 20 units or so would be very appropriate, very doable is maybe a better term to use. And is the whole reason that 69th Street was stubbed into this development is because there is definitely another option for it. So for all of those reasons, not just solely focused on the access that we spent most of the time explaining that, we recommend denial of the comp plan amendment, the change of zone to O3, as well as the use permit, because we don't think it's appropriate in terms of the access. We think the urban residential density zoning is appropriate, is one that is appropriate and would be, in terms of the number of trips that would come and go through South Fork Estates, would be nothing different than you would see in any other neighborhood. And this would then preserve the expressway character of Nebraska Parkway. Because if somebody was to develop this site residentially, even though NDOT had granted access, there'd really be no reason, nor could you afford the cost of building a right turn lane and a driveway if you were doing this site as residential development. So that is our quick summary of our staff report and reasons for recommending denial. Be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Dick?
Christie, Steve, just so I make sure I understood you correctly, is that even though the city is recommending denial for access to Nebraska Parkway, the state of Nebraska could grant access to that property from Nebraska Parkway?
Correct. The state is in control of the access. The city is in control of the comprehensive plan,
the zoning,
and any use permits or special permits that go with that. And so while the access, the state has already said they would grant access, we view that if this property is developed residential, as we recommend that it should, that while they would have the ability to take access with a driveway to Nebraska Parkway, no residential developer would want to do that in terms of the cost that would be involved to develop it for 10 to 15 townhomes, when it was really kind of unnecessary. As a matter of fact, it might be something that would be viewed as a negative, having that kind of access. Because already you've seen letters from some of the neighborhood folks, mostly who live in country meadows to the south, that they are concerned about there being a driveway access on this. I should note that while we recommend denial of all 3 applications, we do know that there might be a circumstance where the city council would want to approve the use permit. So we have put together conditions that if it is to be approved, we put together conditions for the use permit that would be appropriate for how this would then be developed.
Yes,
Yeah, just for a point of clarity, you mentioned 69th Street.
Yes.
Can you explain that a bit more? So based on the plan that was proposed, that isn't a driveway outlet at this point, right?
Correct. So as part of the development proposal that you have in front of you, the applicant is not asking to take access to 69th Street. In their plan, 69th Street would just continue as a dead end. It's a little hard to see here on the plan. This particular plan has shown a 40-foot setback. I believe what they've talked about with the neighbors is a greater setback. But in this plan, 69th Street would just be unchanged. As a matter of fact, because of their grading, there would be a retaining wall on that site, and there would be probably a 4 to 5 foot drop off the end of it. So the barricade that is there today would remain under the proposed plan.
I read that in 03, the proposal is for medical use only, but 03 would also allow future retail.
Yeah, the O3 zoning district itself allows retail as long as it's within a building that has residential or offices. There's a percentage of retail that can be done within the O3. The same also with personal services. Personal services would be things like nail salons and that type of thing. but the building itself would be basically office use, because what we're trying to encourage in the O3 district is not for it to be just solely one use, but there would be a variety of uses that would support the office use as a whole. If the developer has a separate agreement with the HOA to restrict some of those uses, that would be a separate agreement between the developer and the HOA, and is not something that would be enforced by the city. With our conditions with the use permit, this was referred to as a medical office park. Our recommendation, if this is approved, is that the word medical be removed, because we do not want to be in the condition of trying to decide as an office use, a medical office use or not. It's not a term anymore that is used in zoning. Our parking requirements previously were just for office uses. We didn't treat them any differently. O3 no longer has a parking requirement. But that is just something we think for the long term, why initially perhaps maybe a doctor's group would occupy the whole building. Over time, office use changes, and sometimes people want to lease it out to somebody who's not a strictly medical office use. The impact, though, in terms of the neighbors and traffic would probably be generally about the same. So I wouldn't see as a detriment striking the word medical, either to what the neighbors are trying to accomplish or the property as a whole.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you. We will now hear testimony from the applicant. Shelley?
Yeah, thank you.
You.
Thank you. Okay, let's get these passed out first.
Just for procedural purposes, we will probably need a little longer than 5 minutes because I'm speaking, my colleague Rob is speaking, and then Nate from Riga is going to speak. So,
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for asking ahead of time.
so members of the Planning Commission, my name is David Clausen, 129 North 10th Street, Suite 313, Lincoln, 68508. I represent Glenbrook LLC, the developer, and I stand here before you today in support of the proposed medical office complex project, which includes an offset turn lane for access off of Nebraska Parkway. My presence here today marks the culmination of over a year's worth of intensive work, collaborating with various stakeholders, including the City of Lincoln, LTU, the Planning Department, the Nebraska Department of Transportation, the South Forks Neighborhood Association, and many others. This project represents a significant opportunity for Lincoln. A medical office complex in this location would be a tremendous asset to our community, following the positive examples set by similar recent developments, such as the new Lincoln Pediatric Group office at 62nd and Old Cheney Road, and the Nebraska Pain Institute at Nebraska Parkway and Pine Lake Road. These facilities have demonstrably enhanced convenient healthcare access, which leads to enhanced quality of life for Lincoln residents, as well as implementing aesthetically pleasing modern design in a highly visible area of our city. Our proposed medical office complex is not just another commercial development. It is a targeted response to a critical need in our state. In 2023, Forbes published an article ranking Nebraska 39th in healthcare quality nationwide. This study considered crucial factors such as healthcare access, outcomes, cost, and quality of hospital care. These statistics should alarm us all and spur us into action. Projects like ours, which seek to expand medical office supply and improve healthcare access, should be celebrated and expedited, not shunned. Our proposed development goes beyond mere commercial interests. It represents an investment in the health and well-being of our citizens. By increasing the availability of medical office space, we can enhance access to healthcare services, potentially improving health outcomes and quality of life for countless residents. While you may hear opposition from some neighborhood groups to the south of Nebraska Parkway, I want to emphasize that we have worked hand in hand with our directly abutting neighbors in the South Forks neighborhood who support this development and are represented here today by their counsel, Ann Post, who will be speaking a little later. I would ask those opposing neighbors to empathize with the South Fork residents, just as the South Fork neighbors wish to maintain the pastoral character and low traffic through their neighborhood in the same way that Country and Artisan Meadows neighbors were concerned about increased traffic off of 66th Street years ago when 70th Street was being developed. I'd also like to point out that with the addition of the South Beltway, the character of traffic in the area has significantly improved. And to illustrate this point, if we were to pull up the Lancaster County GIS aerial map that Steve had shown, you'd count 6 to 7, depending on how you count, semi-trailers in front of our property. That traffic is largely gone now. And additionally, our proposed medical office complex is by design a relatively low trip generator compared to retail or fast food establishments. So, and this choice respects the wishes of our abutting neighbors in South Forks while still providing for viable development of the property. All that to say, I understand change can be challenging, but it's often necessary for community growth and improvement. Now I want to focus the remainder of my remarks addressing the recommendation of the Planning Department to deny approval for our access request off of Nebraska Parkway. As a locally owned development company deeply invested in the growth and well-being of Lincoln, I must express our profound concern over this decision and its potential ramifications. First, the Planning Department's assertion in their report that there is more than adequate commercial and office development along Nebraska Parkway. With all due respect to the staff at Planning Department, this statement sends a chilling message to the business community, one that is detrimental to our city's economic future. In a state and a city that desperately need development dollars for job creation and broadening the tax base, we should be fostering an environment that welcomes investment and not discouraging it. Moreover, the design of our complex, featuring an offset turn lane for access off of Nebraska Parkway, demonstrates our commitment to integrating seamlessly with existing infrastructure while prioritizing safety and traffic flow. I understand there are concerns about the offset turn lane, but the Planning Department's rationale that this type of access has never been approved before is frankly not a strong basis for denial. Innovation often requires us to be the first to implement new solutions. Let me remind you of a similar situation. Prior to the installation of the 2-lane roundabout at 14th and Superior, such a design had never been implemented in Lincoln. Today, these roundabouts are ubiquitous throughout our city, operating safely and efficiently. And our proposed offset turn lane is similar. It's an innovative access solution for a complicated property that is designed with safety and efficiency in mind. Just as the roundabouts have proven their worth, I'm confident that our access design will do the same. We shouldn't let fear of the unfamiliar prevent us from embracing smart, forward-thinking urban design. For all these reasons, I implore you, the Planning Commission, to have the resolve to vote in favor of our proposal in spite of the denial recommendation of the Planning Department. Let us work together to find solutions that address any concerns while allowing this important project to move forward. Our city has the opportunity to take a significant step forwards, improving healthcare access and quality and creating jobs. Let's not let this chance slip away due to overly restrictive interpretations of zoning regulations and access management plans. By doing so, you will send a clear message that our city is open for business, committed to improving healthcare, and dedicated to the well-being of its citizens. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Rob Ott, Senior Counsel for the applicant, and obviously David shared a lot of our concerns and the issues before us, and I want to do a couple of things. Partly, if any of you listened to Matt Rule after his last win, his voice cadence was so fast it was almost indistinguishable as the English language. When I'm nervous, I tend to do the same thing. I always can be admonished to slow down. I want to thank you and the staff for everything that's happened here. This is a little bit of a change, and sometimes that's hard. A brief history. So I rode snowmobiles and rode horses on Old Cheney Road. I know the area over the course of the last 40 some odd years. I was there when the city fought with Hub Hall. I was there when Kent Seacrest proposed the edge to Edgewood, and then Edgewood continued to grow. The GIS map of 64 shows this as almost all farmland, and the stub that comes into this piece of property was not requested by this piece of property. It's part of how we develop property, where that north 40 acres was sold to the South Fork neighborhood, and they had by city code to show some access point. Nebraska Parkway, I think Dave did a great job of mentioning how much it's changed. You know, you see the 6 or 8 semis that are going past our property in the last aerial that has largely changed. I want to address a couple of things. First, why not housing? Well, there's a couple of reasons for why not housing, and I want to go through those. The company's been looking at residential uses there for at least 7 years. We had an multi-survey, we did the grading, looked at the grading, looked at the fall, looked at everything else, and it's just super hard to get housing. With all due respect to the design that Steve's shown, which we have not been shown previously, that's just super hard to do. And I'll say this. So I've met personally with some builders that have names that you would know in Lincoln, Nebraska. We've been on site, standing on that area. There is not a builder that would take that site even at a reduced rate. Why? Well, because that site abuts Nebraska Parkway and abuts 70th Street. If you go stand on that during any part of the day or night, it's super loud there. It's not going to be a place where somebody's going to want to build a nice house, much less even townhomes or anything else that the city would propose. We've asked, we've used 100 designs to show builders and can't get anybody to even make us an offer on that for that very reason. I've been on site with homeowners with that neighborhood. Again, the traffic there is really substantial, even back away from the highway and on 70th Street. We had a signed letter of intent with a developer to put apartments on this site. When that happened, we let that expire because we started meeting with the homeowners association, talking with them. That was clearly something that they did not want. The city has suggested, and Ann will discuss, that the city's report says, I think in a number of times, that 19 units could go on this site. Maybe so in a perfect world, but that's math. That isn't reality, and with all due respect, the residential piece of this is of the neighborhood is about 40 acres. This is about 5 acres, and simply put, housing doesn't work. If it would have worked, we'd have done it, because we're really not in the residential space for our company. We do mainly other things. I want to go overboard and talk about the staff report, but I need to make a couple of points. David made one, and I think that's true about whether we have adequate commercial and office development along Nebraska Parkway. I'm not sure whether it's staff's role to be able to say in the city of Lincoln that we have enough commercial and office space along Nebraska Parkway. I just don't think that we need to send the note to everybody that's in the report that says, there is not a pressing need for more commercial and space community-wide. Now, wait a minute. Respectfully, our planning staff should not be making those statements. What does that say to people that are looking at Lincoln for their businesses, for growth of their businesses, and for our attitude towards businesses? I'm reading further. Additional commercial space is not needed to serve the residents in this area. Again, I'm not sure that's planning that should be making those statements, but certainly it throws a wet blanket over those that think, oh, maybe I'll go look at expanding my business or putting a new medical clinic in or something like that. So I think it's important to read between the lines here. The report that it's contrary to access managed policy, I agree with that. We acknowledge that. We knew going in, we've known for a year that planning was going to object to this, because the access management policy really says no access here. But the state initially denied this, and on our ask for review, looked at it again and looked at it hard. The state has controlled access there, but it's the state that has said, hey, listen, we think this works here. And you've got a letter in your materials, the big package of materials that I gave you, that talks about Kimley Horn's opinion that not only is it safe, but it's reasonable. City makes a point that this site is is surrounded by residential neighbors. True, it is, there are residential neighbors, but on page 12 of the materials, I just put a snapshot, and it shows the residences to the south, which is Artisan Meadows and Country Meadows, the neighbors to the north, which endorse this project, the church to the east, which certainly isn't residential, and then the big complex that has Home Depot and the Pine Lock Pet Adoption Center. So really, out of the four quadrants, the only, I'm sorry, am I on the wrong page? Oh, I'm sorry, very good. Yeah, you have this in the page 12 of your materials too. So thank you. I'll put that on so others can see it if they want to look.
Thank you.
So the idea that this is really an island in a sea of residential space is really not true. I think planning has been super surprised that the Nebraska Department of Transportation endorsed this site for access. And Steve's right, they do control access. And they could have said no. But after a re-examination of all of our reports and our traffic studies and everything else, in fact, they pointed out a significant error that we made originally back in maybe April. But after re-examination, they have said that they would approve this. And again, in the materials, on page 2 is that Nebraska letter that we got. We're thrilled that the state would say, we can endorse this, right? There was some issue made of this retaining wall. This is a preliminary plat. That retaining wall is going to move around a little bit. The site probably moves around a little bit. This is a preliminary plat and an idea of what can happen here. We'd be thrilled if somebody'd come and say, hey, we're going to do something a little bit different here. But I think that you can rely on our covenants with that Ann is going to talk about this retaining wall and resolving that concern. Dave didn't mention, and so I'm gonna just say this. I'm not going to mess with the computer. The turn lane that we're proposing into our project going west, right, is the exact same turn lane as you turn onto coming east to turn into 66th Street. It's the same, essentially the same length. It has the cross-hatched area, which means it separates from the driving lanes. So it's not that this is unique to Lincoln. This is something that we mirrored on the other side of the street. All right, another comment. On page 11 of your materials, and my apologies for the handwritten notes. Page 11 of your materials, you see a stretch of highway that goes from 33rd Street on the left-hand side of that to 40th Street on the other side. In the planning report, it was noted that that's an example of how we don't allow access. Well, I think that's a little disingenuous. Again, I've been in this area for a long time. The north side of that area, from 33rd to 40th, generally we've seen it underwater. I mean, because that's where, when we have a heavy rain, that all drains into there. And on the right hand, or on the south side of that, is Tierra Park that runs all the way. Well, of course you're not going to have access points there. We don't dispute that. And we don't really dispute that the policy of the city has been no driveways here. But this is the exception. I did something that, we'll see if it works. On page 12 of your report, no, not page 12. On page 14 of your report, can't read my own handwriting. Page 14 of your report is the staff report from the project at 27th and Old Cheney Road. That's the new, call it the brain clinic because I can't come up with a better word, but it's right by the fire station. That project sat empty, that lot sat empty for years and years, and I printed the whole thing. So I printed the whole report, and towards the end you'll see where it is, Old Cheney Road, 27th Street. And I think it's been subject of litigation in the past, at least my memory serves me right, I think, by saying it's been subject to litigation. And the reason I gave you 6 or 8 pages of that is to draw a distinction. I understand that planning just does not want our project. But then you look at this project. In their report, they quote about a half a page of comprehensive plan items. In our report, I think they had 3.5 pages of comprehensive plan duplication. In this report, they had about 4, let's see. Their analysis consisted of 4 bullet points. With our project, their analysis consisted of 30 bullet points. Never at 27th and Highway 2, or Old Cheney Road, did they mention anything about traffic studies. Did they mention anything about anything else? They just said, hey, conforms to the comprehensive plan, we're going to do it. And oh, by the way, this is a turn lane that you enter as you crest on 27th Street over the hill, going down the hill on 27th Street if you're going north. Okay? No idea of anything about turn lanes, but the distinction is, maybe a little bit, is that this was a city-owned property. And so the city sold this property. The other distinction, or the other thing that I want to draw, is this site, the 27th and Old Cheney Road site, is about half the size of the site that we're talking about. It has about 21,000 square feet of space. It's on about 2+ acres. We've asked for about $51,000 worth of space on about 5 acres. So it's interesting to draw a comparison about how the analysis goes with the planning department on a piece of property that they own, that the city owns, and how they've taken objection to our planning. Again, if you look at this sort of project next to residential, I'd say, holy cow, it's awesome. The Lincoln Pediatric Clinic got built and is right abutting Black Forest Estates and the neighbors in Black Forest Estates. All of those neighbors supported that. Initially, planning did not support it, but the planning report actually came out and supported that eventually. That's a beautiful project. If you haven't been to 66th, 62nd and Old Cheney Road and looked at Lincoln Pediatric, look at that. And the neighbors couldn't be more thrilled, because the one thing that you don't think about is that cuts down on the noise going back into the neighborhood. That building cuts down on noise into the neighborhood. We think the same will be true of our project here. You know, again, I'm gonna let Ann go through covenants and talk about that a little bit. I do want to address, I don't know how many Country Meadows folks are here. Again, showing my age, I represented Country Meadows when we fought with Lowe's. And I know a bunch of the people out there and still am friends with some of them, but we raised heck with Lowe's. And I don't think there's anybody here that might remember that except maybe Dick, maybe Rich. But we made Lowe's make some real changes and eventually got to the point where the neighborhood association said, okay, we can live with this. And so maybe it doesn't work perfectly, but that's the environment that we're in. And I say that because I appreciate what the Country Meadows neighbors are asking. One of the things that David and I did, and Nate, we met with Liz Elliott, Director Elliott, and talked to her about the concerns of that neighborhood. And one of the things that I heard from the neighbors there, and I talked to a number of them, was we're afraid that traffic is going to leave your site going west and want to turn around somewhere and go east. And that the turnaround point is going to be 66th Street, which is Country Meadows. I agree. I think that Country Meadows should try to protect that a little bit. We talked to Director Elliott. She promised that she would have her and her staff look at no U-turns there. It's hard to navigate that anyway. I mean, it would be hard to get out of our site and get across 2 lanes of traffic and navigate that, but it's in process. A couple of questions you might ask planning. Where's all this space that adequately serves all of our office and commercial needs, and how is that measured? Walmart and Menards out on Nebraska Parkway is an island of O3. Where's other spaces? If you look at that, there's not land out there for sale. There's not land out there being developed. Another question you might ask. When do you think that the speed limit will change coming up over 70th Street? Right now it is an expressway. I think Country Meadows, I think the South Fork people, I think everybody on down, especially as you get to 56th Street, all hope that that can change, that speed limit can change as of 70th Street. Maybe it should change further out. But it doesn't need to be an expressway anymore. That's a question for a different day, but it does augur in favor of saying, you know, our city's growing and it's going to change. We're not going to have an expressway all the way through it like we used to have. I had some other paper but I'm going to skip that because I probably will run over time. In the paper this morning was Neighborhood a Novel Model. This is Foxtail Meadows. This is Foxtail Meadows. And this is out on Highway 77, and this is the Hoppy development out there, which has had piles of money pour into it, and it's affordable housing and rental and property for sale. I was out there at the ribbon cutting and looked at all that, and I thought, wow, much has been made of that effort, and I agree and should. We're underhoused in Lincoln, Nebraska, but much was made of that, and there were people there, and Mike Flood sent in a letter and did all that kind of stuff. But I hope that as a planning commission, you say to yourself, how do we have the same zeal and vigor towards commercial developments, especially ones like this, which do comply with the comprehensive plan for infill and use and those sorts of things, to give people that are in our community good places to work and good places to grow if you have a business. You just can't have one without the other. You just can't. So this project makes good sense. The neighborhood is in support of it. I think Nate maybe had a couple of comments that he wanted to make, so I'll let him make that. And any questions?
Rich?
You referred to the letter from the Department of Transportation of Nebraska. Then following your highlighted area, it says we have the following requirements for gaining access. The first bullet point is an updated traffic impact study with the previous comments set on April 10th to the city of Lincoln. Has that been done?
It has been. Yeah, all those comments we agreed with, and the updated traffic study was done. I mentioned that the Department of Roads was the one that pointed out that our original traffic study only did the
first floor.
We
proposed 2 floors.
And they just missed a note that said it was 2 floors. Nebraska caught that, we made that change, and that's what they evaluated this on.
Okay, thank you. And if you could make sure you don't repeat any of the things, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Nate Burnett, Rig Engineering, 601 Old Cheney Road. David and Rob did a great job, so they hit a lot of my bullet points. A couple things. Rob talked why not residential, and I just real quick why 03. When we initially were kind of talking with planning, we thought that was what made the most sense if we didn't go with residential. Riga's had the privilege over the last few years to be part of numerous medical office type of facilities that are expanding. We are part of advanced medical imaging, which I think they would love to expand, but they're having issues with parking. We've been working with Lincoln Surgical Hospital. They're getting to the point where they can't really expand on their property anymore. As Rob mentioned, the South 27th and Old Cheney medical property that is just recently, as well as the one that is just up the road at Pine Lake and Nebraska Parkway. And for comparison on that, that was about 42,000 square feet on 3.14 acres. So that's about 13,000 square feet per acre. The Old Cheney one is just under 10,000 square feet of office space per acre, and we're proposing right around 10,000 square feet per acre as well. Regarding a couple of the comments, there's been several letters from the Country Meadows HOA. You know, we were empathetic with them when South 70th was being reconstructed here recently. They had lots of construction traffic going through their property, and we empathize with, you know, some of their concerns. As Rob mentioned, we had met with Liz Elliott and a couple other members of LTU last week, and they were going to be looking into how we can mitigate that. And so that's one item on the site-specific conditions that we would like further clarification on from the planning department. 2.11, revise the site plan to mitigate the increase in U-turns. We're not exactly 100% sure what that means, and we had met with LTU. They said that they would be looking into that. In terms of the decel lane, as Rob mentioned, NDOT put out a paper, actually a guy that I went to grad school with, Tim Foss, and he did his master's on offset deceleration lanes. And so when we met with NDOT a couple months ago, we noted that one of your own engineers had put out this paper on the safety for these deceleration lanes, and that it was modeled on the one just across at South 66th, which is the entrance into Country Meadows. So we believe that is safe. We've gotten word from NDOT that they approve of that concept. A couple other items here quick that were mentioned in some of the letters were aesthetics and light pollution. The covenants that Ann's going to talk about are going to be, you know, making sure that these buildings are very aesthetically pleasing. And then regarding light pollution, as Steve mentioned, with the requirement for 175-foot setback for parking and 200 feet for building, that should minimize any light pollution that would be on there. And then I guess last couple things regarding the grading that Steve kind of talked about. We graded it based on, you know, what a single floor would look like. We are proposing for the potential for 2 stories. If we do go with 2 stories, that east and north wall could act as a foundation wall. So instead of a true retaining wall, the building could function itself as that retaining wall. And so we would request that site-specific condition 2.6, revise the grading plan to show a sufficient area north of the retaining wall, since this is conceptual, that, you know, we can leave that as is, and once this goes to building permit, that could be worked out at that time. In addition to that, some of the covenants already kind of talk about landscape buffer, so some of that stuff could be worked out once we truly have a final plan. We would also like to keep in there the use of the word medical. That has been kind of our desire since the beginning, is to see, as David mentioned, the ability to add additional medical space, and we think that also helps, you know, prevent any concerns that the neighbors might have about other, you know, commercial uses that would come into here. And then I guess lastly, this wasn't a site-specific condition, but and Rob can maybe mention this later for applicant rebuttal, for item number 3, no building permit shall be issued until a final plat. If any final plat on all or portion of the property is not submitted within 5 years, the city may require a new use permit. We would request that condition go from 5 to 10 years. Any questions?
Any questions? Okay, Commissioner Day.
Even though Steve mentioned that the planning department is opposed to an entrance off of 70th, and even though there is a 15-foot drop in that area, as an engineer, there's got to be ways to bring traffic off of 70th rather than Nebraska Parkway. Have you looked at that?
Kimberly Horn had done the traffic study, and that, from the get-go with that compound curve in there, it's just very difficult, and sight distance is difficult. One of the things in the staff report, talked about with the traffic study, having a southbound right turn lane from 70th onto Nebraska Parkway. I think it mentions it in the staff report that there is already issues with that turning movement. It was mentioned in our meeting with LTU last week that there are issues with no current deceleration lane there. So, if we're providing that deceleration lane as part of the project, not only is that helping a potential problem, but it's already helping a pre-existing problem. And then regarding Nebraska Parkway, that shoulder is very wide as you accelerate from 70th Street to where we're showing the proposed access. So a significant portion of that turn lane, is almost already there with that existing shoulder. So I guess I just mentioned that as well.
Well, I'm in looking at the maps and everything, you're pretty much right across from the Berean entrance at that point. On the northernmost point of the property you're bringing forward.
If there was access there, or
No, there is an access to Berean on the east side.
further north?
From the north,
Well,
yes, and south.
yeah, there's a decent amount of grade change. I think maybe a previous engineer was looking at this on the property, and with that grade change there was some significant issues, and maybe Rob can.
We've had this looked at 1,000 times trying to get access off 70th Street. Been told by planning 1,000 times no. But one of the things we spent a fair amount of time on is figuring out how we could get into that site from that Berean Church lane that you're mentioning. We looked at a roundabout there, soften that traffic. We looked at putting the roundabout down just a little bit further, but that double curve, the speed, the change in grade just makes that, I won't say impossible, because I don't think it's impossible, but the cost, expense, and disruption of doing it there would be cataclysmic for that area. So we looked at that. Actually, that would have been really a nice thing to do, but it just simply doesn't work engineering wise.
Okay.
Says the Kimberly Horn folks.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, now we'll entertain testimony in support.
Good afternoon. My name is Ann Post. I'm an attorney with Rembolt Ludke Law Firm. I'm here today on behalf of the South Fork Homeowners Association in support of this application. So first, let me start out with the association's consideration of this application. When the idea of developing this parcel first came to the association, they took a hard look at the parcel. When we look at the parcel, it has frontage on two major streets. That both means a lot of noise. That also means it is fantastic frontage for commercial use. What we also saw is a city that has a dire shortage of housing, really a country that has a dire shortage of housing and has several policies in place, multiple policies including several passed by this planning commission that support infill housing, that support housing density, all as in a way to address the desperate need for housing. And then finally, we have this existing neighborhood whose main concern is traffic through the neighborhood. This history was touched on a little bit by Mr. Hendrickson, but as some of the main concern, this neighborhood was originally developed as an acreage development outside of city limits. As Mr. Hendrickson said, it was approved in 1988. It was annexed in 1992. As part of that annexation, it was brought onto the city wastewater system. It is currently still served by its own private community well water system, and its streets are not built to city standard streets. Its streets are built to the same county standard streets that were built at the time. So these are actually pictures that we went out and took this morning to really give you a better idea of exactly why this traffic is so concerning to the neighborhood. As you can see, we have no curb and gutter on these streets. They are the 1988 asphalt streets that have been patched, the streets that have been patched multiple times. This is actually that 69th Street. I'll try and zoom in here. Maybe you can see that a little bit better. 69th Street in the neighborhood, that is the exact street that is being talked about would be used for residential access if this property were to develop residentially. And so it is given that the streets are in this condition is where, though there are 24 housing units currently in the neighborhood, the addition of, up to 19 housing units as discussed, or, as was also mentioned in the staff report, there have been several instances where I will let planning staff correct me if I'm wrong. I believe I've seen up to 100 housing units for a single access point in certain circumstances. Now, I understand those aren't those circumstances. These aren't those. But given that context and that potential for additional traffic on this street is where the neighborhood association first started talking to the developer over a year ago about the potential for development of this area and what it would look like, what the neighborhood could support, and their concerns with this project. So that's the setup. The major concern is traffic through the neighborhood, and where we arrived at, we had multiple conversations with the developer, both about their intended use, that is that medical office use, the proposal for what a site plan could look like, but also ensuring that no matter what circumstances would arise, that the neighborhood would still have some, their interests would still be addressed. So that's where, as was mentioned several times, we went through an extensive process of both after having the discussion of what this use permit looked like, what this developer is proposing, also putting together a set of covenants. As Mr. Hendrickson pointed out, covenants are an agreement between the neighborhood and the developer. They are not an agreement that the city is a party to, but that is on purpose. The reason that we have set up that legal structure is so because they run with the land. That means that if the developer, after they get this approval, they go and sell the property, these covenants remain in place, the neighborhood remains able to protect their own interests with these covenants. So for those reasons, you'll also note that we have gone through an extensive process of use restrictions in these covenants. As was mentioned several times, the developer has requested medical office use. The O3 district allows more than medical office use, and as you are all very aware, the restrictions on use under zoning can be changed by the Planning Commission, by the city. While neighborhoods have the ability to have public comment and are listened to, they are not the ultimate decision makers in that process. That's why we have this structured as covenants, so that the neighborhood would have the right to enforce those use restrictions. So these covenants, I won't, again, as these aren't in agreement with the city, I won't go through every paragraph in detail, but what the neighborhood has reviewed and approved this set of covenants. We have, if I may take a few minutes to continue, the developer has delivered to us a signed copy of the covenants, so we have instructions that we get to, are authorized to record as soon as the zoning change and these additional applications are approved. These covenants address things like the use restriction, a 50-foot buffer, a landscape plan, integration of solar and what that looks like, facade materials, ensuring that lighting is not directed towards the neighborhood. And these even contemplate retail uses, limitations on that, what that can look like, if there is a drive-through, what that looks like. While we understand that none of those are currently permitted under the use restriction, again, we wanted to ensure that if the owner changes, if the plans change, that the neighborhood still has some control over what the impact of this development on the neighborhood. So that is where, with those supports, or with those covenants in place, the neighborhood supports this project, the neighborhood association, and is requesting that this Planning Commission recommend approval. So with that, I will take one more minute to say, first, really thank the South Fork Neighborhood Association. It has been my pleasure to work with them. They've really done a great job of balancing both understanding the needs for community growth with also balancing that with the impacts to their neighborhood. In addition, in working with the developer, as I've said, this has been over a year process. We've gone back and forth through several drafts. If you look through some of the covenants, we've even got so far as what type of hood a potential beverage business would be allowed to have, really to help strike that balance of what is acceptable, what the neighborhood wants to work with and willing to work with, and also what the developer can make work in this area. So with that, I want to thank all those parties, and I am happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions from us? Thank you.
Thank you.
Additional testimony and support?
I'm Sean Berry, President of the Homeowners Association for South Fork Estates. As you have already heard already, we've had numerous meetings with Rob Ott and sort of detailed the covenants that we've come up with. We've had meetings of the board, we've had meetings of the Open Association and discuss these things. We feel that from our standpoint that the project that is proposed will have the least amount of impact upon our neighborhood, and we are in favor of proceeding with what has been submitted here today.
Okay, any questions? Thank you for your time. Additional testimony in support?
Good afternoon. I'm Billy Joe Kerr, 6811 South Fork Circle, Lincoln, Nebraska, 68516. I am one of the 5 property owners that back up to this. I am the 3rd one from the east. We've worked with the developer for a really long time, and I approve this. I hope you do too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Additional testimony and support? Okay, we will move to testimony in a neutral position. Testimony in opposition.
Hi, I'm Jeff Woida, 6401 South 66th Street. I am the current president of Country Meadows Homeowners Association. I'm not going to be up here and pretend I know what the right answer is here, but I know the public safety is certainly the concern that we have at Country Meadows. This is a dangerous intersection at 70th and what I'm going to still call Highway 2, even though it's Nebraska Parkway. It's kind of almost like an Autobahn out there, right? The speed limit's 55. My question for a lot of you is, how often do any of you travel that on a daily basis? How many of you try to turn into any of those from 70th Street? If you don't do it on a daily basis, I don't think you can really understand what we are contending with here. It's already dangerous, something needs to be done, and to add something else in that is only going to make it worse. The current speed limit is 55, which now that it's no longer considered a highway, I firmly believe it should be reduced down, certainly for public safety. Because really 55 isn't only 55, it's 62, because they're not going to pull you over unless you're doing 63. So I've seen enough accidents occur there. We hear ambulances pretty much about every other day because it seems like there's accidents that occur up on that. My wife was in one here a few years ago where someone tried to beat the light going westbound, and she was turning left onto 70th, and this gal tried to run the light, and unfortunately my wife hit her. And so I know there's been numerous other accidents. I know there was a fatality there a few years back on that windy curve there. So, you know, in order for this to move forward, I think there's some things that certainly have to be looked at. You know, for starters, it'll be increased traffic flow. And I kind of put on here, I don't know if you can pull this up, got the right spot or not. I kind of made a few X's here where there are no turn lanes. And I know Riga just kind of mentioned that. Right here, coming off of 70th Street, there is no right-hand turn lane. All right, that's a horrible intersection to begin with because it turns. Okay, so there's no way to turn on to Nebraska Parkway really, and so the traffic backs up there. for quite a ways during high volume times. If we were to turn off of there going into our development, we have, I wish I would have measured it, but 75 feet at the most for a turn lane to get into 66 coming off of that Nebraska Parkway. Anytime you turn there, you got to cut across 2 lanes of traffic to get over that turn lane. I am afraid every time I do that at 55 miles an hour, someone's going 62. And if you don't get into that lane and turn down in time, you're going to get rear-ended. So the public safety of what I'm concerned about with this project moving forward is, as even Rob Ott said, yeah, we are concerned about the traffic that's going to come through there. All right, there is no U-turn sign there, and people do turn around there quite often. All right, so if you have these people coming out of that development and they want to go back eastbound, how do they get there? All right, will they go up to Apple's Way and use a stoplight to turn around to head back to go eastbound? No, more than likely what they're going to do is they're going to come up to our lane here at 66 and try to whip a U-turn there. All right, and the dangerous part about that is if we are coming out of 66, trying to get onto Highway 2, you don't know that car is whipping a U-turn until it's too late. And when you got cars coming that fast at you, public safety is really in peril here. Really, I mean, the accidents that can occur, I mean, I don't know how many times I've been fortunate enough to avoid an accident there because that's happening. So for starters, a no U-turn sign needs to be there before anything even moves forward. As I said, recommend 45 miles an hour as well, okay? And then increased traffic, I think that will come through our neighborhood. I understand, I mean, I feel for South Fork.
One more minute.
They don't want the traffic in their neighborhood, but I firmly see that it'll push it more towards ours. So, Rob admitted to the traffic, we contend with it, all right? And when he brought up 27th and 67th and Old Cheney, those are residential side streets. Those aren't pretty much Nebraska Parkway. And I also want it on record, and supposedly anytime a change of zoning is supposed to occur, homeowners within a half mile are supposed to be aware of that. Artisan Meadows was not aware of this, and neither were we. Part of the reason why this got pushed back 2 weeks is because we learned about it literally maybe about 17 days ago, okay? And another thing I guess we need to contend with, if a person does come out of there, how will they get back going eastbound? And not only that, how are they going to get there in the first place? If they're coming from West Lincoln, they probably have to take Old Cheney, which is going to put more traffic onto that turn lane there on the Nebraska Parkway. And if you come off of Nebraska Parkway as well, if we were to turn onto 7, there's still no turn lane there either. So certainly needs to be looked at with who I don't know, but that whole area certainly could be safer. And as a resident of there, that's why we oppose this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there any questions? Thank you. Additional testimony in opposition.
Sorry, we're part of Artisan Meadows, and we just found out about this. Do we?
Yes, you
here.
would have permission to speak, correct.
You are here.
You bet.
Come on down.
You bet.
Sorry, I'm very new at this. I'm
No
Terry
problem.
Boulay. This is Cheryl Boulay. We live at 6565 South 70th, and we own the property next to it. So the entire property that goes directly south of exactly what you were looking at, we own that. And I'm telling you, this is a speedway. I know it's said that less trucks go through there. There's still plenty. And I have seen most of the accidents on that corner because we own all that strip and the corner that goes to the south. And he's correct. That turn lane is kind of a makeshift. It's not really a turn lane, but if you cheat, you can get by with it, right? And so the traffic is incredible. We didn't find out about this till 5 days ago, and so we are in the process of building a home on that corner. So this is brand new news to us.
People do build on Highway 2. We love our home there. It is important to us to keep the traffic reduced. If you travel west on Highway 2 back into Lincoln, you come to a little bit of a crest, at that intersection of 70th. You really can't see beyond that intersection. So if you imagine an additional roadway coming out just after that intersection, there's already fatalities and accidents that happen frequently there. The motorcycle accident a couple years ago touched us personally, so we're well aware of the safety at that intersection. This is concerning to add an additional roadway or entrance coming there right after that intersection. And as was touched on, we're also concerned about the zoning potential to the residents that are around that. Someone mentioned earlier that 3/4 is business. No, we're directly across. We're not business. South Fork is on the other side. They're not business. Country Meadows is right next to us. They're not business. So they're referring to kitty corner to Home Depot and Berean. That's it. The rest of us are all residential. We are affected by this.
Can you point out your lot for me?
It is, well, we are the two
Yeah,
on
there
the
you go.
end.
There you go.
Yeah, we're all of this one, all the way to the end.
Okay,
We own this
Side by
lot
side,
and
right
this
out,
one.
yeah.
okay, so those two lots on the south side.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And no one knocked on our door. We literally just found out about this within the last week to 10
Yeah,
days.
so we've got housing
So-
here, and then there's empty space here, which they were gonna
Right.
put up another medical center here, and then business to the corner.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other testimony in opposition? Okay. Staff? What questions do we have for staff today? Commissioner Campbell?
Steve, I remember reading them, but could you go through the requirements that planning was suggesting if this were to be approved by us and the city council?
Sure. Let me get back to that section of the use permit. Okay, so the change of zone and the comp plan amendment, that's just simple denial or approval. So the use permit, if it's for approval, this was the conditions. One, you have to have the change of zone comp plan amendment approved. The rest of them, some of these were just pretty straightforward items. Again, the comment that was made about the medical from all the buildings is really just trying to look out for the future tenants of this building, that it has not become the city's job to try to enforce, are you a medical use or not? If that's something they want to have in the covenants and enforce through the covenants, that's fine. We're just saying that should not be a city staff job to make sure that this is medical office versus office use. And as I noted, it really in terms of traffic generation, noise to the neighbors, everything else, it really doesn't matter if it's medical or office in terms of the land use impacts of those. 2.6 was revise the grading plan to show a sufficient area north of retaining wall. This is all really about the landscape screening. This really doesn't have anything to do with, oh, we could have a building there we use it as a wall. This is simply, as far as we could tell, there was only 10 feet between the retaining wall and the north property line. The north property line owners contacted us and had a lot of questions about this and noted many of the existing trees are just on the other side of the fence on their property. So they hang over the property line, and I'm not suspecting the developer would remove, the part of the trees that hang over. But if you only have 10 feet and you have trees hanging over and then you have a retaining wall drop of 15 feet, we were just simply questioning if the neighbors are depending that there's going to be a new landscape screen there, and we don't know what that is. Is that a double row of trees? Is that a single evergreen tree that's got a design spread of 30 feet? If that 10 feet was actually sufficient enough for the landscape screen. And this could be an item that is noted that it has to be handled maybe prior to a building permit when you have a more defined plan in place. But we were just questioning that if a landscape screen, the neighbors are depending on that, 10 feet between an existing property and the retaining wall, in our view, is just not enough for landscape screening that we don't know what it is, though. So that's the whole point for 2.6. Okay, so the other thing in terms of the conditions was about revising the site plan to mitigate the increase in U-turns. And I'll have Bob Simmering come up with Lincoln Transportation and Utilities. But I'll say not just here, but in other circumstances, what LTU has noted is you can put up a sign that says no U-turns, but if there is well sufficient space for somebody to make the U-turn, people are going to make U-turns. You can try to put up signs to address behaviors, but it is hard to address that when there's actually sufficient space to go ahead and do that. So we were not viewing this as the responsibility of the city to design and mitigate the impact of this development. It was the responsibility of this development to come up with, well, we could do this, we could do that, to try to address those U-turns. I don't know if Bob had anything. Yeah, I'm sorry, Bob. Why don't you come up to address the point on 2.11?
I think that Bob Simmering, LTU, 949 Bond Street. Yes, there was a meeting and there was a discussion. I think there needs to be some resolution to the issue of the U-turn and what is happening. In addition to that, I think it will probably come up that the intersection of 70th and Nebraska Parkway in their traffic study calls out issues with each movement in that intersection. For instance, the southbound right, the traffic increases over 100%, drops the operation level of that intersection down to E, and it's different than school. E was excellent in school. D is the one after F. So, yes, it's a failing intersection at that point. So those are issues that we are requesting to be addressed. The northbound left is an additional, even in their traffic studies, call that as insufficient. So we do have as conditions for this that we would like to see in there would be the addressing all of the legs of that intersection in addition to the issue of the U-turn.
I could continue then to address the conditions that are noted. So as Bob noted, those conditions in regards to the right-hand turn lane in South 70th Street going southbound to westbound, that is a condition, and I think the developer has already agreed that they would install that right turn lane. But the rest of the potential improvements or required improvements are listed in the conditions. The condition that if you do not do anything within 5 years, you must resubmit the use permit. That's in the subdivision ordinance. That's not something that you can waive. That's nothing that was advertised as a requested waiver. So if you do move the conditions of approval, that's not one you could change from 5 to 10 years. That's in the subdivision ordinance. And even if that was a requested waiver, there's just an awful lot of discussion in regards to our floodplain standards about in 5 years, if you do nothing, you need to bring your project up to the standards, which is basically what this is saying, is that in a 5-year time, standards can change, and if you've done nothing on the plan, the city could take a look at it to see if you should meet today's standards. So even if that was a requested and advertised waiver, that is not something that can be waived at this point. The rest of the conditions then really just get into the typical things that are required in terms of this use permit serves as a preliminary plat. So these are requirements that you do, the street trees, the water and the sewer, all of the rest of those very particular items. But in terms of the conditions that were proposed, I think we would say leave in all of the conditions because there's a reason behind them, some of them to protect the neighborhoods because of the landscape screening.
Additional questions?
You just address some of the points that were brought up about speed limits and whose authority that would be under.
I'm sure. One of the things I would note is one of the things that is very common for developments throughout the city is that you can put up a speed limit sign, but it's really about what is the street or the highway designed to. And as was noted by the residents and anyone who's driven on it, it is developed as an expressway. It is one of our unique, or really our only expressway within the city. You have I-80, you have Highway 77, you have the South Beltway, all at the edges of the city. this is an expressway and it's been built as an expressway. And so human behavior is such as that if it's built as an expressway with limited access points, your expectation is that you can drive at a higher speed. That is the purpose of an expressway. So to make the comment that, well, really just the city needs to change the speed limit and that would solve the problem, that doesn't address the problem because you've designed and built this as an expressway. People's expectation is, I don't have anything that I can see from to my left to my right. I have wide lanes. I have very few intersections that I have to worry about. I have very few turn lanes or very traffic signals. So you go faster because the design of the roadway is such to facilitate fast movements. That's why within neighborhoods, we try to do the opposite. You try to have 27-foot wide roads. You try to have narrower lanes. You have street trees. You have people parking on the street. All the things that as a driver signal to you, you need to go slower through the neighborhood because you have all of these things in your way. All these side movements, people pulling out of the driveways. Here on Nebraska Parkway, you're not expecting that at all. This has been set up for 40+ years as an expressway. So we're trying to look at this as the view of the community as a whole. And so I think the simplistic, just change the speed limit, no offense to people who testified that they think that that should be done. I don't think that that's going to solve the problem. And I think nationwide, I'm not just speaking as Steve, the city planner, I think you can see that in traffic studies done by traffic engineers that indeed the design of the street dictates how people comfortable they feel. And Nebraska Parkway, people feel comfortable driving fast because that's how it's been set up for 40 years. If I could address one other comment that was made about our department in terms of not supporting commercial development. Because if you don't mind, I know that wasn't a question, but really anything could be farther from the truth. And I think I don't need to go into details because our actions of the last 20 years show we not only support residential development, which is mentioned by Ann Post, is a dire need in our community, but we support commercial development as well. And we do actually track commercial development. We track commercial developments that are approved and unbuilt. And all we were simply pointing out is that over the last 5 years, we could show you a long list of commercial developments that have converted to housing because the demand has been for housing, not for the commercial development. Commercial development is wildly important to our community. It provides jobs, it provides places for people to shop, and et cetera. So, but I would also point out that as the comp plan goals, there's lots of goals that say we need to have adequate commercial within our community. So our job is to implement the comp plan, which says you need to make sure you have adequate commercial development in the city. And what we're trying to point out is that there is. And I'd also point out that there's nothing that says, oh, Nebraska Parkway in and of itself needs to have more commercial development. And what I would point out is Nebraska Parkway, if you just go east of 84th Street, there are still vacant lots in that approved commercial development east of 84th Street. Do we support healthcare? Yes, we have supported all of our hospitals' expansions and new medical offices throughout the community. All we're trying to point out is that if this was not approved, there's still lots of other places that a medical office could locate in South Lincoln and Southeast Lincoln. You've got the new Bryan Medical Facility at South 40th and Rokeby Road. That was supported by the city. So this isn't about do we support health care or not. This is about does this corridor have adequate commercial development as one aspect of the review. You probably have 3 to 4 million square feet of commercial space built and occupied within 2 miles of this development. So what we were just trying to point out is if I'm a resident of this area, am I lacking adequate commercial space? There are portions of our community that do lack access to grocery stores, access to other services. This is not one of those corridors that suffers from a lack of that type of development. So I just wanted to address that one point. Anything else?
Did we want to, oh, go ahead.
Question, just for clarity here. So I know it is denial of this from the department, but in the event that it goes to City Council for approval, there is conditions around the right turn lane. So can you explain what those conditions are a little bit more? So I know committee agrees to complete a right turn lane on 70th or Nebraska Highway. Can you just explain that a little bit more?
So there would be 2. the applicant's plan already shows a right turn lane in Nebraska Parkway. And as Nate noted, that is being designed to NDOT standards. That wasn't an issue, was it being built to standards or not? But the traffic study did show that there was a need for a southbound, so you're in 70th Street coming southbound, a right turn lane to go west. Because this site itself is not going to be at a median opening, in order to get to this site, the traffic study assumed that as much as 75% of the trips would be coming southbound on 70th Street. That's why there's such a heavy turn movement, is really if you're coming from the north, that's the way to do it. You could come down Nebraska Parkway and make a U-turn, but a lot of people don't like to do that. Some people are comfortable because there's a lot of space there in terms of the width of the concrete. But since you'd have a lot of turns coming through, the developer, and they can address that in their rebuttal, I think they've agreed already to pay that cost, and that would be a cost that is actually impact fee eligible for reimbursement because it would be sufficient for the community as a whole. That said, if this development is turned down, it doesn't mean the city would never do that right turn lane. It just, at this present time, while it may have some need for it, it is not yet in the city's plans to be done. So you wouldn't approve a development simply to try to get a right turn lane. But yes, those improvements are listed within point 3 as items that would need to be addressed as part of a future building permit final plat process.
Okay, that was the question I was going to ask also, so thank you. Any other questions?
Steve, yes.
Commissioner Rich.
I'm thinking of the lane between 33rd and 27th. There's an entire lane where you can turn right off of 33rd and stay basically on that shoulder or access all the way to 27th. So it's a speed up and a slow down lane. Will there be something similar to this from 70th to this potential access into the commercial development?
I'd have Bob Simmering come back up, but we'll pull up the site plans and make sure we understand the question here. So here is the site plan as proposed, and what it is showing is a right-hand turn lane into the site with the typical taper and deceleration, and it is offset. Maybe have...
Yeah, I think that is correct, and that's the way it would be designed by current standards.
So it does not go all the way to 70th?
No, as Ed has shown, here, let me pull it over. Here is 70th Street's paving is over here, so it starts west of 70th Street.
Correct.
With the deceleration lane. There isn't a acceleration lane coming out of it.
Right, you couldn't drive through the 70th Street intersection on that lane, and we wouldn't want that to happen. You'd want to make that turning move so you're coming after you get through the 70th Street intersection.
Okay. Anyone else?
Can you continue that, Steve, moving it to the west?
And back the structure?
Down, pull it down. No, I'm sorry. I want to see the turn.
So this is 70th Street over here, I think is what they're trying to show.
And the deceleration lane to turn is at that arrow point.
Yeah, this is showing the total distance where here you start the new right-hand turn lane. So the right-hand turn lane at this point is, 1 foot wide.
Yeah.
And then it widens out, and the striped part of it is where what Nate was talking about in terms of this is a typical design, what you would see in other highway locations where you offset the turn lane, and let's see if I can get up to the top here. You offset it so that this car here, as it's pulling out, looking to see is anyone coming from 70th Street side, somebody coming in this turn lane isn't blocking your view. They have been offset to the right, and that's a very typical type of turn lane that you would have on a highway.
Okay. Okay. Applicant rebuttal, please.
Rob Ott again. Let me address a couple of things, and maybe Nate as well. I agree with the Country Meadows neighbors. I don't know how they didn't hear from about this project. So to some extent, apologize. Some of the people in that neighborhood knew. We thought it was far enough away that across the 2, 3, 4 lanes of traffic or more that maybe it wasn't going to make a difference. But we agree with them. And I'm going to disagree with Steve about this expressway idea. We don't want I-80 coming into Lincoln. What we really want is this traffic to step down like it already steps down from going 75 or 70 miles an hour out by Menards or east of Menards. It steps down and steps down and steps down to 55. We don't think there's any reason why it can't step down a little further. And in fact, to that point, if there's another turn lane here, maybe it clues drivers in that this should step down just a little bit. But a couple of things. We didn't know how to address the turn lane for Country Meadows by what we're doing, except meeting with traffic and saying, hey, is there some solution we can look at? We proposed the no turn lane sign and maybe doing some things there. So I don't know what more anybody thinks that we can do there, but I wanted to address that. I think Steve did a really nice job of explaining the turn lane that we have here. It's really long and it's separated by that crosshatch area. So, it's not just abutting 2 lanes of traffic. There's the crosshatch area, so your car is actually about a lane away from the traffic movement there. So I appreciate, Rich, I think that was your comment about that. I wanted to point out in your materials, so part of what we get beat up about a little bit is, look on page 9 if you would, the materials that I forget about this thing. On page 9, there's one turn lane here on 70th Street and Nebraska Parkway, and that's coming west. You have a turn lane onto 70th Street. There's no turn lane getting out of essentially Home Depot and that area, that commercial area. There's no turn lane going into Home Depot. You're probably familiar with that if you ever go buy any tools. You drive on the shoulder because the traffic's all backed up. So there's no turn lane there, and there's no turn lane on 70th Street going from 70th Street west. So in 3 of these movements, there's no turn lane. As I don't know all the lettering, but we're the straw apparently that broke the camel's back, because the Kimley-Horn traffic study says our increase in traffic is 2%, I think, right?
Overall,
yeah. 2%, overall. And now everybody says, oh, you should put in this big expensive turn lane or 2 big expensive turn lanes, because your development is really increasing a little bit of traffic. When we have an intersection that's already an F or a D or a whatever it is down the road. So I just want to be clear that we've agreed to put in that second turn lane, and that's really a benefit to the city. And so to the extent that we're talking about traffic and marginal increases, we're the straw that broke the camel's back in some ways. So I want to point that out. There's just a lot to talk about, and I don't want to bore you to death on this. I think we've addressed all of the issues that really are important here, largely. Here's a picture. I'm sorry, this is my hand. I didn't want to pay Nate to draw this, but this is my drawing of a turn lane, right? So this is a turn lane that would come in here. Somebody asked about how far the 70th Street is from where you enter our lane. And that's significant because there's this you don't want to have people coming up over the hill and all of a sudden trying to hit into a turn lane. You want that to be a gradual sort of thing. I can't remember who it was that testified, asked the question about distance from essentially where our entry point would be to the point of where you would enter the turn lane to go onto 66th Street on the left-hand side of the street. So drive with me west. You're driving west. you enter our site on the right, assuming somebody exits our site and is going to go continue west. There's about, I think it's 700 feet, might be 500 feet, might be 500 and some feet from our entry to the point at which you would get into the turn lane to turn left into
Country Meadows.
Country Meadows. The Country Meadows turn lane is about 140 feet long, maybe 100 and more than that, because I think that total difference was about 170 feet. Don't quote me on how accurate that is, but it's pretty close, because when I was talking with one of the neighbors, I was online measuring it. Again, not satisfactory, and I agree with Steve. People violate traffic signs all the time, and if you put a no U-turn sign there, people are going to violate that. But a lot of people, like my wife, would never violate a traffic sign. So at least there's a portion of the motoring public that's going to honor something like that if you set it up that way. It's also, that intersection's really hard to see. People that really don't know it's there aren't going to find it.
Did you want to 2.4 at the medical?
Oh, I don't want to beat this to the term medical. We don't want the planning department to have to enforce anything. We view this as a medical plaza. We view this as somebody coming and saying we want to put a nice little medical building there. I don't know what it hurts to have that term there. If planning has the big enough heartburn, but it seems to me that when planning did the proposal for 27th and Old Cheney Road, seems to me it said that this was a medical use. I'd have to read it, and I'm not going to do that. So do we have heartburn over that? We've always envisioned this as a medical use, as a medical plaza. So we'll leave that to your discretion. Thank you, and I'll be quiet.
The one thing that we haven't mentioned is item 2.6 regarding the revised grading plan. I know Steve, the planning department, maybe has some concerns regarding that landscape buffer. I think that could easily be sorted out, as he mentioned, about prior to building permit, since there are the covenants with the neighbors to the north, as Ann mentioned. That's between private property owners, not knowing exactly if the end site plan could look like this. I think we just wait to address that specific grading, retaining wall, potential using the building as a foundation wall at time of building permit would be our request.
Will you indulge me one more comment? I circled it and then I couldn't read my own writing. Attached in your materials on page 22 is a copy of the covenants. These have been, is Ann still here? These have been highly negotiated, right? We spent 9 months on these covenants, and if you review them, you'll see we talk about the philosophy, access, exterior building materials, what the roof is going to be like, and the elevation required of the roof. We talk about, there's a page of landscaping, prohibited uses, accessory equipment, signage, wires, food and beverage establishments. We've agreed not to allow any restaurant on this site. Would we have loved to have had a Chick-fil-A here with double drive-thrus? Absolutely. Are we going to do that? Absolutely not. We've waived that. Talks about architectural details and what these buildings are going to look like, parking lot lighting, solar technology integration, and even a dispute resolution if there's a dispute between the neighborhood association. I would challenge almost any developer to say that they've got a more expansive set of covenants with the neighborhood association than we've agreed to. That Ann talked us into. All right, thank you for that indulgence.
Any other questions for them?
I do have a quick question.
Oh, we can't take it from the floor. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, though. Okay. May we have a motion to close the public hearing?
I would move to close the public hearing.
Second, Edens.
Ball?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Cruz?
Yes.
Ebert?
Yes.
Edens?
Yes.
Rodenberg?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Public hearing closed.
I would move to approve comprehensive plan amendment 24004.
I'll second.
The reason I came in ready to deny this entire thing, just not feeling it, that corner. I go by that corner daily. And I know what they're talking about on traffic turning left and all of that, and hassles and the accidents that happen in that intersection. But I don't see the city being willing to help figure out something on 70th Street. And I'm not sure 70th Street's the right answer. And that area is 55 miles an hour, but the minute you hit 56, or a little before 56, it's 45. So I think that having transportation looking into maybe starting out at 91st with the shopping center and reducing the traffic speed limit to 45 along that entire area would help the entire situation as the city grows and expands. And I think the turn lane that they're proposing actually makes the most sense from a safety standpoint for vehicular traffic in that entire intersection area. The covenants, or not the covenants, but the requirements that the city is proposing that the city council adopt, I think that's open to negotiations on the different things, whether it says medical or not medical and so on and so forth, that can be done in the 3 weeks or 4 weeks before it would go to the council, between the planning department and the developer. I think that I really just don't see another solution for that property. 69th Street is not built to city standards, and there's no requirements to build it to city standards, whether it be through the fees that are paid by a developer to the city. I don't know if that could be done for 69th Street, but in as much as the South Fork neighbors don't wish to have it be on 69th Street, and there is another solution to that, and plus it's, instead of it being residential, it is of a commercial use. So it does keep some separation between the two, and I think enhances the properties in the South Fork neighborhood to remain as a residential neighborhood. So I have changed my mind 180%, and will be supporting all three.
Would you like to go next?
Well, no.
No, no, I would not.
So it is denial, so you're saying approval of denial? Or?
No, to approve.
Okay, you're asking for a clarification of the motion?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, who would like to speak next?
To answer the clarification is that I will be voting to approve on 3.
I have thoughts.
I have thoughts too. You go.
Okay.
Go first.
Sure.
Great.
As someone who travels this intersection very regularly, it is a hot dumpster fire. Not in the least of which because of the turn lanes or lack thereof. I will also admit, I guess I shouldn't do this publicly, but I am a leadfoot. I'm one of those people, thank you, I'm one of those people who is muttering under her breath that it's only 55, because I think it should be 75, frankly. If it were up to me, it'd be like, go. Highway 2 is the only way to get through town from one side of town to the other quickly, expediently. If you look at where the commercial developments exist, there are always, those commercial exist off of those major streets. Yes and no, there are a few pockets here and there. There's a reason why we have a comprehensive plan. There's a reason we have expert staff making recommendations. If not our staff, who is going to make these recommendations? They're the ones who are helping us to hew true to the plan for our city, which is in the best interests of all citizens. If it's in the best interest of all people, then pitting commercial versus residential versus this versus that is a folly. We need to be thinking about how is this space meant to be used. Frankly, I don't think we need yet another healthcare space. There are plenty of commercial healthcare spaces in this city that can be used. If this area is to be used for infill, then residential makes sense. But if you are going to put residential in this spot, then we do need to, regardless of what it's going to be used for, regardless, we do need to figure out the turn lane situation, and we do need to figure out access. And it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be one of two spots along Highway 2, Nebraska Parkway, that gets accessed with its own special lane. And where we do have weird lanes, again, we're talking about exceptions to the rule with the concrete plant, not the rule itself. I don't see why we need to make an exception in this situation, especially when it's for commercial use, and especially when it doesn't conform to the 2050 plan. And I appreciate Steve and the rest of the staff who make those recommendations, those expert informed recommendations based on research like traffic studies and usage, people's actual daily use.
Okay, thank you.
I agree with what she stated. I don't think this is a bad location for commercial use, but we got to figure out access to it. And off of Nebraska Parkway, I got it right. I don't think that's the right answer. As for the shortage of medical offices, come north. We need you, please. Look at where all the new medical offices are. I'm driving 10 miles to get there. So is there a shortage in this area of Lincoln, Nebraska for medical offices? My doctor's a mile, 2 miles away from that, so no. Come north, we got room for you. I do not drive this every day. I am a North Lincoln resident, proud North Lincoln resident, but I had a child with the Capital Humane Society job, and I had a child that worked at Lowe's. And every single day when they left that house, I said, remember, stop twice on Highway 2. People die on that road. And I think that's important that we look at what has happened on that road, and maybe we're putting the apple in front of, or the cart in front of the horse, whatever the term is anymore, that this intersection needs work before we look at commercial. And whether that falls to the city to do, and it's on their list at some point, I don't know. But I don't agree with the access off Nebraska Parkway. I think we're just asking for more trouble in an already troubled intersection.
I'll go next. Yeah, I do drive this. I visit my mother over at South Lake off of 91st and Nebraska Parkway. I think the city has done a good job of, if I go 55 or heaven forbid faster, I'm going to stop at red lights. I've found that going 50 or 45, I can hit all the lights. And so I think there is a traffic calming there. I'm always frustrated when I'm planning to hit the green light and the people that are back stopped and I don't have to slow down or stop, and someone races past me and pulls in front of me and they have to stop and then I have to slow down. But I think the lights themselves do regulate the traffic quite a bit. I think I side with Dick. especially if the developer is willing to put in the turn lane off of 70th and off of Nebraska Parkway. And then I'm concerned about turning on to Nebraska Parkway from this development, that it's also a good, safe on-ramp type of thing. I think it can be done, and it's not my place to say whether this is supposed to be best used as commercial or residential. They've looked at the residential aspect of it, and they've just decided that that's not feasible, and that the medical office building would be feasible. I'm going to vote to approve it, assuming that all of these safety factors. In fact, I think they'll leave the intersection with the turn lanes better than left, especially coming off of 70th.
Next. I feel like we're being asked to make a policy decision about the nature and character of Nebraska Parkway, and I'm just not sure that that's our role. Today, Nebraska Parkway is a freeway. It is. So that's the lens through which I'm evaluating this application. I do applaud the developer for trying to find a solution that I do think is a challenging parcel. I appreciate that there's a lot of time and expense that was put in to even get the application to this point. I don't dislike the project. I don't dislike the idea of a medical office there. I just think that our role is to say whether or not this conforms to the comprehensive plan, and I don't believe that it does. It's commercial surrounded by residential. It's not in conformance with the access management policy. So that's the lens through which I'm evaluating the application.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to any?
Sure. So I have also going back and forth on this. I think I am in favor of approval, like Commissioner Campbell and Rodenberg, where given the complexity and density of just this intersection and how ability to assist in helping, I do think from a transportation perspective it gets us to a better point there, because I have traveled that area plenty over the past few years. From a zoning perspective, yes, everything is residential around it, and it doesn't necessarily align directly to the comprehensive plan for this particular area, but there is precedent around it for, sort of commercial. And if this, and being that, well, not even if, it is going to the city council for review as well, I do think there's opportunities to evaluate the transportation requests that our planning department has given us, and I think we got a good framework for allowable use in the event this moves forward. That gives me confidence that the right things will be put in place to support this type of business. I'll be supporting this.
Okay, thank you. This is kind of a chicken and the egg thing. I agree with all of my fellow commissioners on some point or another. The policy decision on Nebraska Parkway, that's a big point to be made. Is that our role, and how do we share enough information for the city council to make the decision as they look at this in the next step? I do also think that from a standpoint of infill, we're very supportive of infill as a planning commission. We don't typically push what type of infill, but we really look at that. Another, other than the policy decision, the other issue of one access point in and out of this site seems to be also another item that is very challenging from a site standpoint. And how do we help accommodate that as you look at other turn lanes as we move up and down Nebraska Parkway, and driving that many times personally, but also for this reason, you do work your way through other developments as you get in and out of different areas. And the concrete plant is obviously its own beast happening in the early 1900s. So that is kind of an outlier. At this point, I am leaning towards voting no. But I am a big proponent of the infill aspect. So there lies that challenge there. And I do appreciate the long, and as Dick was saying, my fellow Commissioner Dick Campbell was saying, the very long turn lane seems to be something that is very appropriate to get in and out. It's just how do you navigate all of the parts and pieces of the development from an access management standpoint and setting that precedence. So we'll see what I vote when we get to my calling my name, I guess. So sorry about that, everyone. I haven't quite decided yet, but I'd like us to go ahead and move and have Shelley call the vote.
All right, Ball,
Yes.
Campbell,
Yes.
Cruz,
No.
Ebert,
No.
Edens,
No.
Rodenberg,
Yes.
Joy.
Yes.
Okay.
Motion failed. 4-3.
Yes, go ahead. And
David Carey, Director of the Planning Department. So I just want to make sure it's on the record and everybody that is watching and here understands. So our votes here at the Planning Commission require 5 affirmative votes in whatever direction in order for it to move forward, if it is to move forward to the final decision body, which in this case would be the City Council. So on a 4-3 vote on any of these items, that means that it does not have sufficient votes to move forward. We can see what happens on the other 2 votes as well, but I just want to make it clear that that means that this item and these items, if they're all lacking a 5th vote, that they would be held over 2 weeks to the next Planning Commission hearing. We likely will have an additional attendee to see if there isn't a 5th vote. So I just want to make sure that's clear and on the record, and that is the process that we follow.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, we have 2 additional items on our agenda to be dealt with.
On item 51B, changes zone 24003, I move approval.
Do we have a second?
Second, Ball.
Thank you.
Okay, Ball,
Yes.
Campbell,
Yes.
Cruz,
No.
Ebert,
No.
Edens,
No.
Rodenberg,
Yes.
Joy.
Yes.
And on 51C, use permit 24003, I move approval.
Second, Ball.
Ball,
Yes.
Campbell,
Yes.
Cruz,
No.
Ebert,
No.
Edens,
No.
Rodenberg,
Yes.
Joy.
Yes.
Motion failed due to not having 5 affirmative votes.
Okay, thank you. Let me get to my paper. At this time, at this time we will hear from,
So one more point of clarification, just because this doesn't typically happen. So we have closed the public hearing. There will not be further public hearing at the next meeting. Will be another vote on the carried over item. So just so everybody's clear on that as well. So, thank you.
thank you. At this time, anyone wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda may do so. Okay.
I would move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second, Edens.
Shelley?
Ball,
Yes.
Campbell,
Yes.
Cruz,
Yes.
Ebert,
Yes.
Edens,
Yes.
Rodenberg,
Yes.
Joy.
Yes.
Are adjourned.